Hello everyone, my name's Claire, and this is my team review. I don't like writing and I don't have the confidence to stream, so instead I'm just recording a video that I can restart as many times as I like, and may or may not have done so several times already. Uh, this season I wasn't sure which div I wanted to play. I've typically played either PSD Sun, usually PSD Sun, but I also played EST Tuesday for a while, especially in the early days, since I was one of the original admins for the div. Um, and so I wanted to play with Stonks and EST Tuesday, but I didn't know a ton of the players, and so I felt like PST Sunday would be the div I could take more seriously, especially since it had auction draft, which I think is the more serious of the two draft styles. And admins allowed me to play both. Both divs needed captains. I said I'd captain both divs, so I ended up doing both. And then Burrow Hobbit and EmoCast copied me and also signed up for both. So my draft plan in EST Tuesday was to pick Stonks. And on top of that, I decided I wanted a good P1. So for the first two rounds, I was planning I was going to pick Stonks and then attempt to get either Yuumi or Burrow Hobbit round two. And then I was hopefully going to luck my way into a mid laner and then last pick a support. After realizing that there was a ton of Heimdall support since Stonks wasn't likely to be stolen from me before the top of the second round, I switched it up and decided to first pick my P1 and second pick Stonks, which put me in a bit of a weird position because before it was just I'll pick Burr or Yuumi, probably will only be one of them left at the top of the second round, which wasn't even true. Yuumi went like third round or something crazy. But now I kind of had my pick of which one I wanted. And Yuumi to me was the more reliable P1. He would be a good combo with potatoes if I got potatoes, which I obviously did. Um, and Burrow Hobbit was more of a jack of all trades. But for some reason, I ended up going with Burrow Hobbit, and I think part of the reason was that I wanted to draft all three of the players that were playing in two divs, which was me, Burra, and EmoCast. And that didn't end up happening because EmoCast got picked pretty early. But I believe that was the main, as far as I can remember, that was the main reason I picked Burra. I have a draft board that I can look back to, but I didn't write any reasons down. So I think that was it. I think it was just literally a meme. So I picked Burra for partially because I did want a good P1, but also kind of as a meme. And then I picked Stonks just because I want to play Stonks because he's my friend. And then I picked Potatoes because he was like one of the very few mids left. And then I just picked the highest MMR available on the fourth round. So as much as I'd like to claim some big braining during the draft, I really cannot. Other than the fact that I thought Burrow Hobbit and Potatoes were probably a little bit lower than they should have been. I knew Potatoes was an ancient offlaner and fluffy hat, and I thought he was quite good too. So I'm like, he's probably a bit value for a legend. And Burra Hobbit is also a player like she's usually mid to high divine, so seeing her at divine one seemed like a little bit of a steal. But yeah, other than that, unfortunately, no big brain. I didn't really know what the playstyles of these players even were, so I can't claim that I was like combining players with playstyles that would work together. That was all luck. But to move on to the actual early games, as I said, this was kind of the non-serious team for me, and that really got cemented in after our first couple games. Because despite what Burra said on her stream, I was actually a little surprised about what Burra said on her stream about Gaff's laning. I had a really hard time when we first started off because Gaff, and I'll say many nice things about him later in this review, but he is a really bad laner. And I'm not very confident on P3 because I've mostly been a support player, so I'm not a good laner either. Um, but even then, when I say I'm not a good laner, I mean that in like a normal sense, whereas Gaff might be one of the worst P4s I've ever played with, at least at the beginning of the season. It was very common that around 3 minutes in the game, he would have 4 deaths. He would be walking back from Fountain because he'd already used his TP. The enemy has a level advantage on me. They have a numbers advantage on me. They have money advantage on me. If I was playing a Sand King, for example, which I played a couple times early, they'd have all the protection they wanted. And it just sucked. A lot of the like traditional melee offlaners that I was playing don't do well when they're behind, and when they're 2v1, Gaff didn't really seem to be interested in pulling or any other more advanced lane techniques. He just wanted to run at the enemy over and over again, even when they were stronger than him, and he would just feed on repeat, which made the games kind of unfun, to be honest, and made me think that the team probably wasn't going to go very far. But sometime around the middle of the season, I realized that Burhobbit was a very, very good P1. She may not be like the best P1 in terms of like raw, in a vacuum mechanical skill. I know there's like some immortal players in EST Tuesday that are very good, but Burhobbit was very reliable. I think she had very good game knowledge in terms of like she knew what heroes to pick. There was some experimenting we did in the earlier parts of the season, middle parts of the season. There was like a bit of an unfortunate Broodmother game. For example, there was the time she convinced me to pick her PA even though the hero was garbage, but most of the time it was very clear that Burrow Hobbit knew which hero was going to win the game, at least from her hero pool. And she knew the timings. There were times, like on Troll especially, where she's like, okay, we're going to end the game right now. And I hadn't even considered ending the game. But like, she saw the opportunity and we would take it. And we would go. And we would like, end the game on at least one occasion. Pardon me, my throat's a little dry. Let me just take a drink of water. So I began to have a little hope. And Potatoes as well. I don't remember exactly when he calibrated, but at some point he calibrated Divine. And his performances were a little varied, but there were a couple of games where he popped off, and I'm like, okay, this team's probably like on the better side of mid-tier. Like we're an upper mid-tier team. And so I was getting a little hope, and Gaff was getting a little better. He'd also learned Io. To be honest, when Gaff first showed up and said, I've learned a new hero, it's Io, I wasn't super pleased, because that's a hero that's kind of niche. You kind of have to draft around on a player that I thought was a total anchor. But he proved that he was quite good at it, and so that began working out, and so things were looking a little up. I definitely didn't think we were like EST winner contender, but things were looking up. And I think it was week 8, the final week of groups. Burr Hobbit wasn't even there. We had a stand-in, and we were up against the top team, the number 1 seed. At least at the time, they fell to number 2 seed right at the end. With the Iceman team, and we managed to go 1-1, and a pretty solid 1-1, even without Burr Hobbit, who was our very important shot caller, game knowledge player. Shadow Ace is great, but he's definitely not like a shot caller. And he doesn't have the pool Burr has. My God, can I pause this? Because I'm coughing up a storm. Alright, that took a little longer than expected to get over, but as I was saying, playing against the top seed with a stand-in who was mechanically good but didn't really fill the role we needed in our team of shot caller and still managing to go 1-1, I think really gave me the hope that our team could take it all the way, that there was a decent amount of skill there. I think Potatoes was divine at this point, and that we weren't entirely reliant on Burra to win games, even though she was still our win condition. And so from this point, instead of talking about the early playoffs games, I'm just going to talk about the individual players and what they brought to the team and how they improved. Because what would a team review be without talking about the players individually? So we'll start with Gaff, who I've already kind of lampooned as one of the worst, if not the worst, players I've ever laned with, at least from a core perspective, which admittedly isn't a lot of my games. Yeah, early on, he was a bit of a feeder. And honestly, even later on, he still had the occasional over-aggressiveness. Even on Io, which is a hero that I think kind of sated the bloodthirst a bit, just by its nature. I think there was one moment in the first game of Grand Finals where he just ran ahead of me into the gyro and died, which was fairly amusing. But he did improve over the season, and he did so without me saying anything, because, I mean, I'm not very confrontational. He did so without us really ever pubbing together or doing many scrims. And so I appreciate that a lot. I don't know if maybe he was just having a bad couple of weeks the first couple of weeks, and maybe that's why it looked bad, or if he did genuinely improve throughout the season. But if he did improve, or just try and match me, I guess, I do really appreciate it. From like a teammate perspective as well, I think Gaff was definitely my favorite of the four, or maybe favorite's the wrong word, but I think he was the best teammate from like an objective point of view. Um, Everyone on the team had this pretty bad habit, or at least what I see as a bad habit, of showing up to the voice chat like during the draft. And I don't mind it that much, so I mean I didn't call it out or anything, but I don't think it's a good like I said, habit to have to always show up to the draft when it's going on. And Gaff was always the exception to that rule. He always showed up a few minutes early to the voice chat and hung out with me. We never really spoke much or anything, but just the fact he was willing to like show up was fucking fantastic. Um, he said what was needed um, in draft, before games, during games if necessary, but didn't like shit up the comms. That's been an issue with previous picks of mine, especially my friends, frankly, where they just talk way too much. And then on the other side of that, you have like Stonks who doesn't say anything at all. Gaff had it down in the middle, said what was needed to be said, and nothing more if we were in game, but still pleasant to talk to out of game. Um, so yeah, his hero pool was always a bit small. Even at the end, I kind of felt like I ended up forcing him on this ogre and eventually undying because he liked the Dawn, and despite the early failures, later in the season he proved that he really did know how to play it, and we liked picking it, and teams realized this and began banning it every game. The IO drew a lot less attention, but eventually it picked up a couple bans as well, or there were just games where we didn't want to pick IO. It is still a little bit of a niche hero. That kind of went away in the grand finals, but there was at least one playoff game where it's like, my heroes just don't work well with IO. Let's pick a melee hero with a stun. And so he just kind of got pushed onto Ogre for a bit. But he took it well, which I appreciate. Um, and yeah, overall, I would still say laning is a weakness, but he was solid, and he was always very good in the mid game. He kind of got some flack for his Clinks play during playoffs, but if you'd seen the game he played earlier in the season on Clinks, the man was destroying, absolutely carried us. He did still die. He was like 0-4 in lane still, but after lane, he absolutely popped off. His mid game was always very good, and I do think that was part of the overall success of our team, is that we didn't have weak links like Burra Hobbit said. Um, Gaff was our lowest MR player, and he was very capable, ancient. I don't think we ever had a mid game unless we were like already behind or had a draft issue. Like I think we always felt like we were capable of taking on enemy teams in the mid game. We didn't always do so successfully. We still occasionally made mistakes, but I think that was definitely part of it. Is that we go to the mid game, we'd have my supports that I knew were going to do their job. I'd have Potatoes and me. I knew we'd do our job, and we knew that Burra Hobbit would lead us to victory with whatever carry hero she was carrying us all the time. Um, So yeah, that's Gaff. Great teammate. I'd definitely play with him again, but I'd probably put him on P5. Um, to give him a bit of credit, he didn't have P4 as his most desired role. I believe he had, for like role preferences, I think it was like P5 was his desired role and 3 or 4 as secondary. So I'd totally play him with him again, but I'd probably put him on P5 far away from me so I could just see him in the mid game. But moving on to Potatoes, who I think was the other player that could be a little bit hit or miss, and I have some flame slash critique for. He was a player that could really pop off, worked really well with Burr Hobbit because of how willing he was to play sacrificially, but was not super reliable. You'd have one game where he was popping off and carrying us, and we basically won the game before Burr Hobbit was even online, and you had other games where his aggression was getting the best of him. He was going in too hard. He was going for kills that had no chance of succeeding and very high chance of him dying and inevitably just dying for it. Um, so it was always a bit hit or miss. He really had some of the best performances and some of the worst performances of the cores to some degree. I mean, probably nothing was worse than my Legion game, but um, yeah. So that's like I guess the first negative of Potato slash positive. I'd also flame his. He was kind of like the opposite of Burra Hobbit when it came to builds and game knowledge, Potato was willing to do lots of weird things, and sometimes that really worked in our favor. There was a Knicks game. He said pick me mid Knicks, and I was very hesitant, especially given some of the pubs I'd seen him play on mid Knicks. But I ended up going for it because it seemed like it was an okay idea, and he executed it really well. So he can do weird shit like that and make it work. But once again, it's a double-edged sword where he takes a normal hero and just like fucks it up with weird item builds. Like he'll just have these crazy ideas, and I think part of the issue with Dota items is like it's very rare that a Dota item is bad on a Dota hero, right? Like every item does something useful. That's the point. That's why you buy them. The reason certain items are bad is because they're like less efficient or there are better options. And so Potato would come up with these ideas like, oh, this seems like a really cool item or like little combo to get. Like for example, we got the harpoon on Pango in the grand finals over a blink, which was probably not the greatest idea. And I wish I had some better examples off the top of my head, but my man had some wild fucking ideas. He was trying to make mid Witch Doctor work right before the games. Right before the grand finals, they played a warm-up game where he played mid Witch Doctor. He had the wildest ideas, and on one hand, it's fun, it's exciting. He's very open to playing new heroes and creating unique solutions. But on the other hand, I does feel like there's a lack of like good game knowledge. Like sometimes, perhaps even often, it felt like he didn't quite understand why some of the wacky ideas were a bad idea. It's like I think it sounds good. It's like the fuck are you talking about? That's a terrible idea. So I don't know. So kind of the opposite of Burr Hobbit. Yeah, but yeah. Otherwise, his performances were great. His aggressiveness was great. He was also a shot caller for the beginning of the game, I should say. Burr Hobbit would occasionally intervene when things were going awry, but for a lot of games, Burr was actually pretty silent in the beginning, and it was Potato who led the team, which is great because I'm not always great and vocal as much as I'd love to be as a repeat RD12 captain. I don't think I'm great at calling shots. I'm just not vocal with my thoughts enough, and I think a lot of people find me quiet. I don't know if that's a mic issue or a me issue, but anyway, without getting too distracted by that, Potato was also a shot caller early, which was really great, and he did a good job on. Um, I feel like I've perhaps flamed more than I've given positive opinions on most of my players, or Gaff and Potato, who I've talked about so far. But they were great, and I think Burr Hobbit in her stream covered a lot of the great things about them. So maybe because I've read everyone else's content already, I'm not feeling the need to rehash. But yeah, love potatoes. We'll be playing 82L potatoes this season, hopefully. And hope to see some more of his wacky shit while also trying to keep him under control. Moving on to Burr Hobbit herself, the queen, the carry of our team, the only reason we did well in group stage half the time. I mean, Burr Hobbit was absolutely the best pick. I've never felt better about a pick that I was like, I don't really know what I'm going to do in the draft, and seeing how it actually turns out. Because Burr Hobbit shot calling was probably unlike anything I've ever seen in RD2L. To be honest, I've had a lot of immortals that have attempted to shot call, have been decent shot callers, that I've commended for the shot calling even, but Burrow was really something new. It's like I said, she knew what to do and when to do it. Like it wasn't all perfect. There were some mistakes for sure, but it was a lot of confidence. It was always very clear and distinct, and it was just usually right, which is obviously a very important part of shot calling. You can be wrong sometimes, as long as everyone's on the same page, but it did feel like she was more often than not, just correct and really seemed to understand the game in a way and was able to put that into words in a way that I've honestly never seen before. On top of that, she was very reliable with the farm, which always helps with P1. I really don't have that much negative to say about Burra. I'd rehash the thing about showing up late. She was probably the worst out of everyone in terms of showing up to the discard mid-draft. And she might have been the only player I didn't pub with, but I can't really hold that against her, given I didn't even pub that much at the beginning of the season in particular. But yeah, I don't know. I feel like I don't have much to say because it was just really good. But yeah, what am I trying to say here? I feel I very positive feelings about having Burahava on the team, but they just kind of amount to, yeah, she was good. So I don't have anything else to say. So even though I'm saying less about Burra, she really was the reason the team was good. Like absolutely, like one of the most, probably the most important player on the team if I had to pick one. Why is it opening? Oh, there we go. Um, and then lastly is Stokes, the player I played this division for. Stonks' ward game was very good all season. Once again, I have very little negative things to say about Stonks as well. I kind of feel like in RD2L, there's always some players you can rely on and some players that you have to work around. That's kind of the beauty of a mixed skill league. And Burr and Stonks are definitely my reliable players with big hero pools. And the remaining three players, myself, Gaff, and Potatoes, were the ones we had to work around. But yeah, Stonks' warding was great. The vision was great. You'd never guess it if you played a pub with him. I swear to God, there's always wards and Stonks when you play pubs with Stonks. But in RD2L, it was fantastic. We never felt like we had a vision disadvantage. Um, he was willing to play anything. The one negative thing I could say is I wish he had a little more, a bit more opinion and confidence in the draft. Um, I don't mind. Like, I like the fact he was open to me letting him pick heroes that I think worked well with the draft. But there were some games where I'm like, I'll give you anything here. I just need your strongest hero. And, like, the best I would get out of him was him pinging two heroes. Other times he would just basically give me no answer and I'd have to choose. So yeah, that's one downside. Perhaps a little too quiet. I do think, generally speaking, most players are lean towards being too loud in RDSwell over too quiet. Maybe that's not true. I guess my last couple teams haven't been like that, but all you really need is like one player that's too loud, and comms can kind of get fucking destroyed. So I appreciate that we didn't have that this season, but Stonks definitely takes it to the extreme. And just, he'll time Roche for you, because that doesn't require speaking, but he really says almost nothing. In pubs as well, for the record. So yeah. Oh, with all my team members done, I wanted to talk about one last thing. Was I at full screen? Like, glitch the fuck out. And I guess that's finals and our drafts and our play style. What our play style turned into was we had a very distinct, a very one note way of drafting, way of playing the game by the time of grand finals. Earlier in the season, we obviously did some experimenting, tried some stuff. I think even in like the semifinals, we mixed it up a little. But by grand finals, we're like, nope, we have one strategy and we're not moving from it. And I think it was actually really weird because a big part of the strategy was that I would always play ranged heroes. That, I think, was at least the weirdest part of the strategy, is to have a ranged only offlaner. The general concept of Burra being on a good scaling / timing hero and having a mid that makes space for her, like, that's fairly normal stuff. But the weird shit we did with the offlane was odd, and I think for people that maybe have known me for a long time and have seen my playstyle historically in RD2L, it's even weirder, because I don't really... someone even mentioned it, I forgot who it was in Burra's stream chat, but I generally was, if anything, known for only playing melee heroes. Like, I played a season of P5 as a Divine player, and so I would only play, like, Tidehunter and Brewmaster, and I would try and start fights to make up for a weak offlaner. I would do shit like P4 Axe, P4 Mars. Like, I was all about the initiators, and I think what made my transition in season 28 from support to offlane so easy is that I was already playing all these offlaners in the support role. So the fact that I kind of did this big 180 was weird, and a large part of that was the lane. Even though I commend Gaff for getting better, that lane was still kind of hard, because he wasn't a great laner, I wasn't a great laner. It felt like the only lanes that went well, at least consistently, were the lanes that I was playing Wind Ranger in. And when teams began to notice that, Wind Ranger began getting banned. And so I sort of coincidentally ended up playing a pub with one of my oldest RD12 buddies, Mr. Steven Ruggles, and another mutual friend of ours was apparently spamming Wind Ranger, and when he didn't get Wind Ranger, he got Marana. He would play Marana. That's what Luke told me. Um, just out of the blue. I don't remember how it came up. And so I suddenly have this idea, oh shit, maybe I can start playing Marana as well, like an alternate Wind Ranger. And so I started playing Marana, and it worked really well, and I was copying Henry's build, who was the mutual friend of me and Luke's. And then I just kind of took off with it, and I began playing offlane Dark Willow and offlane Hoodwink. I didn't even really play offlane Clinks. I was actually playing that mostly P4 when I was duo queuing with my offlane buddy, but we busted out a P3 Clinks in one of our games as well. And so I just kind of fully went down the rabbit hole of our offlane is not skilled enough for me to win on normal heroes, so I'm just going to play ranged heroes, and I'm going to force Gaff to play some games Ogre, and I'm going to force my mid to play melee heroes. And it honestly felt kind of bad, because I felt like I was drafting in a really selfish way to make up for my own faults, but that's kind of how that ended up, at least from my perspective. I don't know where the team was of my thought process. I don't think I ever said it out loud. I think they just saw I did well in ranged heroes and went along with it, or at least relatively. But yeah, it's been a weird season in that regard. So I felt like I had to talk about that at some point. I may have tangented a bit since I said I was going to talk about grand finals. At least that's what I was planning to talk about, whether I announced it or not. So yeah, so our plan for grand finals, we didn't do too much strategy. My team talked a little bit between games, but not a lot. And I would try and come up with some strategy for the games, but my brain is only so large, uh, approximately 1.5 peanuts in size. So there's only so much strategy that I was doing, and so I wanted to go for an early Pango pick because the little letter patch they put out nerfed the Sand King, buffed the Pango. We decided we were going to delay my pick because it was going to tank a bunch of bans, and I had enough ranged heroes at this point in the cylinder that we wouldn't run out. And we were going to pick Gaff's hero kind of early so that we could utilize the larger hero pool of stonks, and then as always, we were going to last pick a Burr Hobbit hero. That part kind of never changed throughout the season. So that was our strategy. We didn't really know much about what the other team played. I tried to keep in mind some notable heroes. I noticed the Ricky. I wish I had banned that game too, but I did notice it, and I at least banned it game one. I noticed who was it? One of them played like just a bunch of Tide and Legion, so we did a lot of Tide bans. I don't know if they were considering Tide, but we wanted to have an advantage in team fights. Part of the reason we picked Warlock was for that, and we banned Tide so that they wouldn't have their own team fight because they've been picking a lot. At least earlier in the season, they were picking a lot. I don't know if they still pick it, but it's a little hard when there's all these big patches happening around playoffs. So yeah, that was pretty much the strategy. In game one, it worked really well. They picked this Clinks hero. I think that was meant to be a block pick. They didn't play it well at all. Apparently, according to Clocken's blog, that wasn't a hero that player played. And honestly, it was really fucking noticeable. We got the Burr Troll, which was an absolute classic by that point in the season. And we just executed how our team wanted to execute. It was great. I popped off as well, which felt great. The only game I popped off on that series. Um, and then game two, shit kind of fell apart. I think we made mistakes in terms of execution. I think I saw some people referring to it as a throw in Discord, unless they're referring to another game. And I generally agree. I never looked at the net worth charts, so I don't know if it was a throw in the traditional sense if we literally threw a net worth lead, but I think we had the ability to win off the back of the Sven, and we just took some bad fights. I think we had a hard time getting our asses together. I frankly think Burr may have made one particularly not great call, but that's up for debate. Um, what else was there? What was I saying? Oh, and then there was the Ricky. I knew Ricky would be a problem. I fucking hate that hero. I think it's really strong in the right hands. I think it's really strong in RD2L. I think our team is always going to have some lockdown issues because Pango can perma-stun the hell out of someone once he gets on top of them, which isn't always the easiest thing to do, especially if they have any Pango counters or save, which isn't hard when we're like first picking the Pango. Um, yeah, and then I wasn't going to be playing hero with lockdown. Gaff wasn't going to be playing hero with serious lockdown. I picked the Sven, hoping that it would give us a little extra lockdown and a ton of burst to take down the Rookie, and we just didn't quite execute correctly. But at the same time, I do wish I'd just banned it, 'cause it was something I noticed before might have been a problem. And sure enough, I forget the name of the player. Apologies, Mr. Player. I know it started with like an A. I really didn't know anyone on that team, but he did play it very well, and so kudos to you. Um, but game two, I think we were super confident we could bring it back, because although I mean, I'm trying to say how to say this without sounding mean. Even though we made mistakes, and it took a whole team to capitalize on those mistakes from the Clocken team's part. I'll be honest, I was really only scared of the Rookie. I did feel like we were just if we were able to have a good even 5-on-5 fight where they didn't have like this one hero popping off. I think we were just the better team. As I mentioned before, I think we had a really good mid game, and we went into game three, I think, with a good draft that fitted us. We had a couple hiccups with the Muerta being a little squishy early on. Both of us were very susceptible to blade mails. That was a decent call on them. We had these two ranged, I guess, kind of magic nukers slash right clickers, whatever the fuck you'd call Dark Willow Muerta heroes, kind of in a league of their own, where we just couldn't hit into blade mails without BKBs, which forced us to get BKBs. And then Burra made the mistake of killing herself on a Dawn anyway, which was very amusing. But I don't know. I didn't really have any doubts. I know they thought the Dark Seer was big for them, and I think they regretted not picking earlier game three. But I'd be lying to say I was afraid of it at all game two. And so yeah, I'm very happy with how it worked out. I do feel a little bad for the Clocken team after seeing Clocken kind of upset in Discord, but at the same time, I'm an egotistical asshole, and I very much enjoyed owning them. And I think if we replayed it 10 times over, we'd still win most of the time. So anyway, that's that. It's probably a bit long at this point. Um, so yeah, now I gotta figure out how to stitch the two videos together because my throat decided to Sudoku halfway through this. Goodbye, everyone watching. I hope that was semi, uh, whatever. Fuck, not rambly. I forgot. We're done. Fuck.